Yum, yum!
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Modo with Ellery. And in this episode, we're going to look at rigging that you might do for a modeling workflow. So if you haven't done much rigging, if it's something you've been uncomfortable with, this is a good episode for you. If you're looking at getting into some more in-depth ways that you can do your modeling, also for you. If you're also looking at doing some stuff that you could move into rigging for animation, this will also do for you. Now, this is going to be kind of the first part in a series that I'm going to break up on this topic, because there are a lot more topics than just what we're going to cover today. But this one should at least get you started thinking about how you can use some setup items that will help make your modeling job a lot easier. So the end kind of a goal when we're looking at something like this is going to be to take something like this model that is the interior of the cockpit for the dropship modeling series that I've done for Foundry. It's I'll put a link down in the video description if you haven't seen it. It's a multi-part series, but this is one of the two pilot seats that's inside the cockpit, and I wanted to be able to create something using existing assets in the stock content and create something that I could also articulate and move around. And I wanted to make sure that as I did so, everything would fit into place. So this version here actually has everything now frozen and baked down to where it's just solid models, so that it wouldn't weigh down the rest of the modeling process. But you could always go back and use something that is articulated later when you're moving on into an animation phase. But it's very important in some parts of your modeling process to help you visualize and figure things out early on. So what we're going to look at here is actually the articulating arm that comes from this top section. And as a side note, pretty much everything in this is made up of stock content items. So if there's another episode you'd like to see on putting stuff together and kind of kit bashing stuff, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to do something along that lines. So we're going to look at how to create a more articulated version of this arm, which is inside of the Modo stock content. And if we go up here to, let's go over to our model tab here first, and I'm going to go up to the space arm start file. And there we go. And if you don't have the files to work along with, this is basically just a modified version of the space arm. Let's see, what's it called? Space arm 02 that's inside of the Modo stock content. The only difference is I've gone in and added a few more details. I put in a glass section here. I've taken most of the pieces that have some rounded parts, and those have been converted to sub-Ds with some edge weighting added in order to sharpen them up and keep everything nice and clean looking. But basically, it's going to remove any of the kind of low poly look that's on that existing model. All right, so this is where we're going to start. I'm going to start using the version that I have here. If you don't have this, you can start with just the one that is inside of stock content. You'll be able to work along just fine also. So the first thing that we want to do here, and I'm going to just jump through a few different versions of this as we go to kind of keep the pace up a little bit, so that we're not sitting going through every individual bit here. But the first thing that we're going to do is break up the model into kind of logical chunks that we could then use to set up a posable item. All right, so selection sets are something that have been in Modo for years, since back in the beginning, but they had always been kind of hidden up under the select menu, and then down here with a sign and creating selection sets. And that works really well, but the downside is it was kind of hidden. It didn't get used a lot by a lot of people because you had to dig in to find it. And at the same time, it was a little cumbersome to be able to get back and forth to it. Now, once your selection sets were created and everything, it works really well. But since the recent versions of Modo, we've now got the selection sets button up in here, so that we have actions right in a button on the menu that we can do a bunch of cool stuff with selection sets that really speeds up your modeling workflow, even if you're not going to do any of the other stuff that's going on here. So what we'd like to do first here is to select the pieces that will logically fit together. So stage one, as you're working on something like this, is going to be to kind of visually dissect the item that you're looking at. And obviously this is going to be different for hard surface things versus more organic things. And this is kind of more geared towards hard surface things, things that are going to be multi-parts that are put together. But we want to kind of visually dissect this and figure out where we're going to have articulation points where something might move. And then we can start creating coherent sets and eventually layers and in a rigged item out of it in order to get a piece that we can really easily manipulate and work with. All right, so if we look at this, and there have been some changes here on my modified version. I did take and create some clearance through some of these areas so that parts don't overlap, except for areas where parts would be kind of attached, like this section right here would be attached down to this lower section so that it creates kind of an area that is going to hold on to these outer rings. But other than that, everything has been kind of broken apart and turned into kind of separate pieces. So that is one thing that I did do, but it's only going to be really crucial if you're looking at this on a really close, detailed level where you actually want to see how the articulation is actually working. If you're working with the original edition of this model, it will still work. You just may have some areas where you might have some overlapping polygons. So just something to note there. But so in this case, we have this lower section that is just going to be kind of the base, and that's going to be everything kind of down here. So all of this kind of stuff. And actually, I'm going to use middle mouse button to lasso around here so I can select all the way through. You can see that's going to be everything kind of down through here, and not including this guy over here, but everything kind of south of this section. The next section, and let's start here in the middle, is going to be this piece here, and the piece that extends up. Now, you could do this one of a couple of different ways. You may choose to make something that articulates and rotates here. I'm just going to build it so that this is basically one solid piece all the way through here. But when you get up here to the top section, there's another kind of point of articulation where we've got this connecting rod across, and we have another separate piece that's going to go in there. So basically, we'll have this big section through here with all of the little attaching pieces, and that can rotate. And then we'll have this up here at the top that can also rotate around this piece right here. So so that's that. And then going down the sides, and this is going to be symmetrical. So in this case, I'm just going to keep these attached left side to right side. I'm going to keep it mirrored. Now you could also split these apart depending on how that's going to work. I think in this case, since it attaches at the top, they should probably be symmetrical, but you can choose however you'd like to do that. But so we've got this ring here, right? And this is going to be attached around this central hub, but it's not going to be actually physically connected here because we want this to rotate. And you can see that this is actually broken off, and there's a little bit of a kind of a trough in here. And in the future version here that you'll see a little ways down the line, I've even gone and kind of cleaned up this a little bit. But either way, you can see that this is not attached. Then this is going to be kind of a hub that will attach to this inner part here. And then these pieces would be attached down to the lower section. So this then would rotate around that. This piece here, which is going up the middle along with this one, would rotate inside of there. So you have this cuff here on either side that is kind of breaking that up. Right, and then we have the same thing on either side here with an end cap and then just some details, which really don't affect the functionality. They'll just go along for the ride with this this kind of cap on the outside. So then again, working up on the outsides here, same on left and right, we've got an arm that goes up and is attached to the outer sections of this part here. So this one is going to go up and it's going to split like a Y, and the central section is what would rotate. Right, and that's going to rotate along with everything that moves up from here and with part of this. So the mounting part of the ring, the wider part that comes out, and then this whole bit of the ring comes here, around through here, and it's actually going into an open socket here. So that's going to channel through there and going to give us some area that we can rotate. Now, we may want to set up some constraints so that, this piece can't rotate farther than getting to here, or the other direction going farther than getting down to this part. But that's a choice that you can make down the road. So moving further up, we've got a similar kind of thing, but on this top section, we have this part here is firmly attached to this cylindrical section, right? And we have this piece here is going kind of the opposite direction as the lower part, where this ring is attached to the lower section and then has a housing which is attached to the upper section. And if you look in real close here, there is some clearance so that this will actually rotate around without touching it. So the only thing that's really attached here is this piece with the cuff, and that would rotate then around this ring here. and it would be attached upward to this, and you could either have another articulation point here, or you could leave it as one solid piece. But that would just give you all the separate different pieces of articulation so that you can create something that you actually pose instead of just a still static item. So now that we have this figured out, we want to go ahead and start creating some new selection sets that are going to allow us to group pieces together while they're still in the same layer. All right, so in this kind of a case, what I'd probably do would be to middle mouse lasso around this whole bottom section and get everything that's down here. All right, and what you can't even do a lot of times I'll do is I'll hide the items that you have selected, and then you can see, oh, okay, we actually missed one here. So let's undo that hide. So we get that back, and we want this guy and this guy all selected to go with it. So again, let's hide and make sure we've got everything down there. Yep. So we've got everything there. And then I'm going to also want to grab this and this piece here that are going to be the main kind of cuffs that are attached to that solid central hub so that everything can rotate around them. And these parts are going to be what's attached, and everything else is going to rotate around that. So I want to take these then, and we're going to start creating our selection sets. So using this new selection menu, if you haven't used this yet, this is an extremely powerful way of working, and I should really definitely make it a part of your workflow. Once I am working with a part of my workflow that uses this, I'll usually pin it so that it stays, and then you can leave it in here. So right now we don't have anything except for a selection set that is based off of some of the materials that are on here. So what we're going to do is create a new selection set, and you can call it whatever you would like. You can set up the nomenclature however you like to. I'm going to call it base here. Let's call it base. We'll click OK, but that's just created the selection set. It hasn't really set anything to it yet. So I have a couple of options here. So I have editing the set and then editing the selection. Now, editing the set is going to choose whether or not I put or remove things into whatever selection set I currently have denoted here, which right now is base. All right, so what I'm going to do is I want to add these pieces to the set. All right, so now if we deselect, now here under the select menu, we can see that we can either add to our selection, we can remove from our selection, or we can replace our current selection. So if I click add to selection, it's going to select those pieces, which is great. Now if I have you know, maybe this section through here, let's select all this stuff here, and I don't want to get the stuff that is in that base selection, I can choose to remove that from selection. And if I want to just select that, but I already have something selected, I can just replace my selection, and then I've got that very easily selected. Now the cool thing here is once you've started making some of these selections, it facilitates your further selections because you can work with these groups. And you also have a quick select option here, which you can just click on, and it will select whatever selection set that you've just chosen. Okay, so moving forward here, I'm going to go ahead and grab this middle section here just so that we get an idea, and we're just going to grab all of this stuff, and we're going to move all the way up here to this point here, and then I'm going to add this piece right here as well. Okay, so all of this stuff is going to be in our central arm. Oops, and we missed a couple of pieces here. And there are also some bolts here, so I'm just going to middle mouse select around through there just to make sure that I get those along with it. And then we're going to create a new set, which we'll call, this one I'll call central arm. I may rename these later, but that's okay. You can name these however you like. So central arm, we'll click OK, and I want to add these to that set. All right, so now I've got two groups here. I've got my base and I've got my central arm. All right, so once you start getting everything broken down, you'll end up with something that looks like this. So let's jump onto space arm sets, where I have everything broken up into selection sets now. And if we open up our sets menu here, you can see that I've got articulated base, articulated mid, and tip, which are going to be these side pieces. So there's the base, there's the mid, and there's the tip. Right? And then we also have the long arm, which is this long piece right there. And then we have the tip of the long arm. Oops. There we go. And we also have the base, which is down here at the bottom, which also includes those outer hubs, which I forgot to include in that last one. But there you go. So everything here is now put together. And the nice thing is this only takes a few minutes to set up, even with fairly complex items. And remembering that you can use existing selection sets to replace or remove from a selection that you make, it makes it much easier to very quickly go in and start making your selections. So I could pretty easily just kind kind of middle mouse up around through here to kind of make sure that I'm getting all of the polygon groups, and I can be fairly indiscriminate, and then just shift and double click. And I've made this selection here, right? But I don't want anything from the base on here. So let's just go ahead and remove that from the selection. Good, we've got that. And then I also don't want anything from the articulated base, which is these side pieces. So we can remove those from the selection as well. And then we have just the stuff here up the center. All right, so this can allow you to very quickly start breaking up your items into more manageable chunks. And the more dense the item, the closer things are together, the more important this can be. And as you start modeling, this can really help you kind of lay things out so that you can more accurately get to the parts that you want. And based off of these, you can take and hide things. So if I take like my long arm select here, and I can just hide that, and then that's out of the way, and I can just be working with stuff in the middle. So making these selection sets now with this is much easier, and so I'd really recommend doing that if you haven't started using this yet. Okay, so then the next step that we'll go along to, and let's go ahead and close this up and this up, is going to be actually breaking these parts into layers. So let's just close this up here. And here now is our layered piece. So we have those same groups now, and now we actually have these set up into individual layers. So you can just cut and paste those into their own groups, and then you're pretty much set and ready to go. But now that we have these into individual pieces, and this is important with hard surface stuff where you actually want things to articulate and remain rigid, you want to have individual pieces. We're not going to do a rig that is going to set up and attach to the items. You don't want them to deform. We actually want them to all move together. I want to break them apart into separate items here. So I still have my base one in the background, which I'm going to go ahead and hide again. But then I have all of the individual pieces here in their own separate layers. So we got the base, the arm, tip, and all those. So what we're going to do now is actually set up a system of locators that will allow us to parent things together and actually more easily and fluidly move this piece around so that we can get it into the positions that we want to continue on and use that as a part of a larger model. All right, so with that, let's hop over into the Setup tab. And now we can actually start kind of piecing this together. So the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to create just kind of a base, which is going to be a locator at the bottom here, and everything is going to be parented to that. And then everything will attach and move up, so I can just take that piece and move it around if I want to move it into a different position. So let's start just by placing a single locator in here, which we will call arm base. All right, and I'm going to change the look of this as well. Let's change this to a custom shape, and in the custom shape menu here, I'm going to change this from a box to, let's make it a circle on the y-axis, and we can leave it solid because it's going to be down there out of view. And, oops, moved the axis, let's put it back to y, and I'm going to make the radius a bit bigger, and let's go maybe 1.5 about. There we go. So now that's going to be something that everything else is going to fit into. So the next place that I need to put an articulation point is going to be at each one of these hubs. So right here, and this will be the rotation point both for the arms on the sides as well as this long arm down the middle. So we're going to put one here, we're going to put one here, and one here. Right? And we could put a piece up here if we wanted, but I'm just going to kind of go from there. And then we're also going to need one here at the center of this. And we're actually going to put two on the on this central section so that we can have separate pieces to work with. All right, so in order to get everything nicely aligned, I'm going to do this. You can do this a couple of different ways. What I'm going to do is select just the central ring here. Right, that's going right down the middle, and I'm going to start adjusting my work plane so that I can get everything lined up. So I'm going to go to this, and I'm going to align my work plane to the selection. And if you're here in the Setup tab, really nothing is going to look like it has changed, and that's okay because if we know what's going on, then it won't really matter, because right now what it's done is taken the center of space and it's centered it up into the middle of everything. So if you haven't used work planes much, again, is something very worth checking out. It allows you to align your surfaces to, or your orientation of your world to pretty much anything in your model. In this case, we're going to align it to separate pieces so that we can more easily line up our different locators. So let's start by putting a locator here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one and I want to center it up in the center of the world, which is right now centered in the middle of that sleeve up there. So we'll go up here and set, and we want to set this to the work plane position. Now there is also, you can set it to the work plane rotation, but we're going to use position. We don't care about the orientation right now. We just want it to snap right to the center of that space. Okay, so we've got one of those, and I'm going to start renaming these as we go, and let's call this long arm base joint. And you'll want to find some way of differentiating what you're calling these as opposed to the items that are the mesh layers, because otherwise you start getting these parenthetical things, 2 or 3 or 4, if you start just naming things the same thing, even if they're different kinds of items. So just as a note here, I'm putting joint or underscore joint at the end of all of these pieces. Okay, so we've got that done. And again, I'm going to change this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this one and then duplicate it in order to make the other one, so I don't have to make this shape change every time. So let's change this to a custom shape. I'm going to make this, again, a circle, but this one I'm going to put on the x-axis because that's the direction that this is rotating on. And that's probably pretty good. The only thing I'm going to do, though, is make it not solid. Okay, so there is my, my joint base for the central arm. Now I'm going to take this one here and actually duplicate it because I know one of these needs to go in the same space. So we're going to duplicate it. This one we're going to call articulated base, and then we're going to move on from here. So from the long arm, we have the next one up is the tip, and that one's going to be centered around this section right here. So what I'm going to do is select right down the middle. Now, if you can't get to the very middle of an area, so if we zoom in here, I actually can here in this case because there's a few open polygons, but if you can't get to those, a lot of times what I like to do also is select things that are on opposite sides, so you still have a symmetrical selection. And then I'm going to go ahead and adjust my work plane to that. So let's align the work plane to this selection. All right. And now we're going to go down here to our long arm base, and I'm going to duplicate this. And we're going to call this long arm tip. And then I can remove the parentheses 2. And I want to just set that to the work plane position, and it's going to just jump right up to there. Now this one is a little big now because we're getting up here to a smaller section, so I'm just going to scale that down a little bit. And also what we're going to do here when we get lower down here is offset some of these, which we can start by doing right now because we're actually done with this central section, right? So what we're going to do is move this up to there so it's out of the way. And we're going to go to the articulated base joint here. And what I'm going to do is offset this a little bit in the X direction. So if I just pull this up, you can see it starts to separate itself away. The actual position of the locator is still in the center of space, which is fine. But now this is going to offset all of these so that they're out of the way. Just something to help make it a little bit easier. I could also change the scale of these or put different types of locator drawing on them, but I think this is going to work fine for me. So now that we've got this, let's go ahead and move up here, and we've got this central section here which has 2 pieces, so left and right, and they're just central circles in the middle. So we're going to get the circle on both sides. Again, we're going to keep things symmetrical, and we're going to align our work plane. And we're going to take this articulated base and we're going to duplicate it. And we'll call this articulated mid joint. And again, we can get rid of the 2. And now again, we can go ahead and just set that to the work plane position. It's going to snap right up to the side. And then we've got, I'm just going to do one more here, and that's going to be right here. So we're going to take these 2 pieces on either side, set our work plane, align the work plane to the selection. We're going to take this mid joint here, we're going to duplicate it, and this one will be called the tip. And again, we can just click over here, set to the work plane position. Now, if I want to adjust scales and things, I can do that right now as well, but this is going to work fine for me. So the next thing that I'm going to do is actually take these and parent them all to each other. So we're going to create a hierarchy now where we have the tip is going to go for the long arm. The tip is going to go into the long arm base. And then for the articulated arm, the articulated tip will go into the mid, and the mid will go into the base, and then both the articulated and the long arms are going to go into the arm base. All right, so now we have this kind of multi-part hierarchy. So pretty simple. Now you can test functionality here very easily before you've done any kind of attaching, just by selecting one piece here, and I'm going to reset my work plane now, and I'm just going to use my rotate tool. Let's set our action center to the automatic. We'll just select this item here, press E, and we should see those two pieces go along with it. That's right. And just to double check here, now using the up and down arrow keys, you can traverse the hierarchy. So if I go up, it's going to go to the base, which is right. If I go down, it's going to go back to here. If I go down again, it's going to go to here, and that's working. All right, so let's go ahead and undo all that because I don't want these to be all misaligned. And now I can start actually just attaching pieces to other pieces. And I can do this using drop actions, which I can set up here what the drop action is. So if I wanted to, I could just click and drag this base piece over this this item here and hold. And as soon as I hold, it's going to give me a bunch of different drop actions. So the possible things that I can do when I drag and drop one item onto another one, I can match it, match the position, scale, rotation. Match will match all three, position, scale, and rotation. I could insert it into a hierarchy. I could parent it or insert it as the parent. Insert it in place, parent in place, duplicate, parent, duplicate, parent in place, parent, parent, cancel. So what I'm going to be doing in all of these instances is parent in place because I just want to put them in, but I don't want them to move. So let's go ahead and drag and drop that there. And now you can see that underneath the arm base is the base. But since I'm going to use that same drop action for all of these, I'm going to go ahead and select that here on my drop action menu. So I want to go down here and I want to choose parent in place. They're actually upside down from the other menu, so something to keep in mind there. And now what I'm going to do is start putting all of the pieces together. So I'm going to take these arms here, and these will go to this one here. And I can actually just release, and it's going to happen now because I've got the drop action already set up. So you want to just drag it over until the piece that you want to parent it to highlights. So highlighted, drop. And what I should see is things pop out of the menu here in my item list, and they'll actually appear down in there. So we'll actually see that something under articulated base joint is now highlighted, which means that that piece moved. And then we'll grab the tip here, and we'll do the same thing. Drag, highlight, drop, drag. And that one's hard to see, so let's zoom in. Drag, highlight, drop. And then for this base here, same thing, drag till it highlights and drop. So now I should see, yep, nothing in other than that now hidden original geometry, and everything is inside of here. So if I hold shift and open up this arm base, we'll see that everything is here inside of my hierarchy. And now I can really easily take this and I can reposition this arm any way I want just by moving or rotating rather these pieces around. All right, so I'm going to do one last thing here. Let's go back to where we were. And I'm going to select all of my locators here. So let's just go ahead and shift open this all up. And I'm just going to select all of my locators. And I'm just holding control and going down and selecting all of them. There should be 6. Yep, there we go. And I'm just going to zero out. Now my rotation is at 0, and that's good, but I'm going to zero out everything here. So let's just zero all. So now that these have kind of a home location where they are currently existing. All right, so now any kind of rotation changes that I make is not going to be affected by the overall thing. I could go back here, choose 0 and hit enter, and it's going to be done. Now, one last thing that I want to do here is I want to make this so that it's going to be a little bit easier to work with. So if I've got more modeling to do, this is going to be a little bit different. But if I have the modeling on this part done and I'm going to be modeling things around it, I don't want to be accidentally selecting all of these pieces constantly. So what I'm going to do is go through here and select all of the mesh items. All right, so we get all those done. And I'm going to go down to the Assembly subtab here, and under Select, that's set to default, which is going to be everything is set to that by default, I want to change this from default to No. All right, and now I can't accidentally select these mesh items. It's going to make it much easier to go in and click and select one of these pieces and know that I just am getting that, and I don't have to worry about selecting the mesh through. This mesh is now locked down. It's just set up to obey the position of these hierarchical items in our list, and now we have everything set up so that we can much more easily move this around and model around it. So we've got something that is also ready to rig further if we need to use that in animation. So I hope that's a helpful start for you if you want to look at rigging to help your modeling workflow, or if you just want to look at some basic setup that will help you further rig things down the line. If you like this video or videos like it, please like, subscribe, and follow me on Patreon at patreon.com/Ellery, or you can get this episode of Modo with Ellery along with any other one a la carte from Gumroad at gumroad.com/Ellery. Following and subscribing on those locations will get you downloadable versions of the videos, as well as all of the scene and content files, so that you can work right along with what I'm doing. That way you've just got all of the stuff that you need to make it a little bit easier to learn. Now go make something cool, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yum, yum!
Continuing.